The day began in a calm and almost ordinary way, the kind of morning that didn't hint at anything unusual. The sky was still pale, not fully awake, and the studio lights had just flickered on. Inside the main filming hall, the air held a faint mix of dust, cables, and the leftover smell of yesterday's coffee. It was quiet for a moment, but that quiet didn't last long. It never did on a set. In the middle of it all moved a young production assistant named Lena. She had only been working with the team for a couple of months, but she was already used to the rhythm of the morning, checking wires, carrying equipment cases, and making sure every small thing was in its place before the director arrived. It was the kind of job that required attention, patience, and a lot of energy. Luckily, she had all three, even on days when she slept less than she should have. Lena walked across the floor with a clipboard tucked under her arm, her steps quick but careful. She greeted one of the camera operators with a small wave, then ducked under a suspended microphone that was being lowered for testing. The crew was scattered around the hall like pieces of a puzzle being arranged. A ladder stood near the backdrop wall, cables curled like black vines along the ground, and the glow of the monitors added a soft blue tint to the room. Despite the busyness, there was something peaceful in those early moments before filming started. Everyone was still waking up, still warming into their roles for the day. Even the usual jokes and conversations had not yet found their way around the room. Lena glanced at the time. The director would arrive any minute, the director known by everyone. As Rowan was a man known for his calm and composed nature, he walked with a steady pace, spoke in a low, even tone, and never raised his voice unless absolutely necessary. He had directed many documentaries before, some of them even award-winning, but he never carried himself like someone who expected admiration. His leadership came not from loud commands, but from quiet confidence. Most of the crew liked working with him. Some even admired him. Lena respected him too, not only because of his experience, but because he always treated her with patience, even when she made mistakes. Whenever she felt nervous, he had a way of making the situation feel manageable. That alone made mornings easier. At exactly the same moment, the thought crossed her mind. The door near the back of the hall opened. Rowan stepped inside, holding a cup of tea in one hand and a folder in the other. His dark jacket hung neatly over his shoulders, and his expression was as calm as always, focused but gentle. Already thinking ahead. "Morning," he said to the crew, offering a small nod. A wave of greetings followed him as he walked deeper into the hall. Someone rushed to hand him the updated schedule. Another person asked about a lighting change, and yet another pointed out a problem with one of the stands. Rowan listened to each one quietly, responding with short instructions that somehow settled the room. Lena waited until he finished speaking with the lighting team before approaching him with her. "Good morning." "Sir," she said politely. He gave her a brief smile. "Good morning, Lena. Everything running smoothly so far?" "Yes, so far. Camera 2 needs a quick recalibration, but they're already working on it. The interview setup is almost ready, and the guests should arrive in about an hour." "Good," he said. "Let's make sure the sound check is done early today. Yesterday's issues slowed us down. I'll take care of that." He nodded once, then walked toward the main monitor to review the framing for the first shot of the day. For a while, the atmosphere stayed steady. People moved with purpose, talking in low voices and adjusting things with practiced hands. The soft click of equipment being locked into place filled the hall. Someone laughed at a small joke near the props table, and the tension slowly lifted as everyone eased into their roles. It was shaping up to be a normal filming day. Normal. Lena continued her tasks, moving from one end of the hall to the other, checking off items one by one. She was tightening a loose cable on one of the monitors when the main studio door opened again. This time, the sound of it caught her attention. It wasn't one of the crew members. She could tell by the unfamiliar footsteps. She looked up. A man had stepped inside someone she had never seen before. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, dressed in a simple jacket and holding a small envelope in his hand. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match the calmness. Something firm. Something heavy. He paused at the entrance, glancing around as if trying to find someone specific. Lena hesitated for a moment. Visitors weren't unusual, but unannounced visitors were always taken seriously, especially on filming days. She approached him cautiously. "Hello," she said with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" The man shifted his gaze to her. "I'm here to speak with the director. You have an appointment?" she asked. "No," he answered simply. "But it's important. I need to speak with him as soon as possible." Her fingers tightened slightly on her clipboard. People claimed things were important all the time. But something about this man's steady tone made her pause. He wasn't rude, he wasn't emotional, he was just certain. "One moment," Lena said. "Let me check." She walked across the hall toward Rowan, who was now reviewing footage with one of the editors. She waited until they finished discussing a frame adjustment, then leaned closer. "Sir," she whispered quietly so she wouldn't interrupt the others, "there's someone here asking to speak with you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." Rowan raised an eyebrow, in annoyance, but in thought. "Where is he?" "At the entrance?" Rowan nodded once, excused himself from the editor, and walked with her toward the door. Lena followed a few steps behind, curious but trying not to show it. When they reached the man, he turned immediately toward Rowan. "You're the director?" the man asked. "Yes," Rowan replied. "How can I help you?" The man held out the envelope. "I came to give you this. You need to see it before you start filming today." Rowan looked at the envelope for a moment, but didn't take it right away. "And you are?" he asked. "Someone who thinks you should know the truth," the man replied, his voice still calm. A soft murmur passed between some nearby crew members. The words had stirred a small ripple of confusion. Lena felt a faint chill at the back of her neck, though she couldn't explain why. Rowan finally accepted the envelope. "Thank you," he said cautiously. "I'll take a look. I'll wait outside," the man replied. "In case you have questions..." Without another word, he stepped back out of the studio doors, closing them softly behind him. The room felt strangely quiet afterward. A few crew members exchanged glances but quickly pretended to return to their work. Still, the change in the air was noticeable. Like a faint shift in temperature, Rowan looked at the envelope, turning it slightly in his hand. There were no markings on it, no name, no return address, nothing. Just plain paper, folded cleanly. "Do you want me to call security?" Lena asked gently. He shook his head. "No, not yet. Let's see what this is first." Started walking toward his office, and Lena followed automatically. Not quite sure if he wanted her to, but wanting to make sure everything was all right. Inside the office. He closed the door but didn't lock it. The window blinds were half open, letting in thin strips of light that landed across the desk. Rowan sat down and placed the envelope in front of him. For a moment, he simply stared at it, as if preparing himself. Lena stood near the doorway, waiting silently. She could hear faint sounds from outside, the hum of machines, distant footsteps, a muffled voice testing a microphone. Then Rowan opened the envelope. She watched as he slid out a stack of papers and a couple of photographs. He lifted the first page, reading the top lines. His posture didn't change at first, but his eyes did. They shifted in a way Lena couldn't fully understand, something sharp, something suddenly alert. He turned to the second page, then the third. When he reached the photographs, his hand paused. His expression, usually calm and controlled, tightened almost imperceptibly. Lena stepped forward a little. "Sir, is everything all right?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the photographs, and a long silence filled the small room. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "Close the door fully." "Please," he said. Lena felt her chest tighten, but did as he asked. She shut the door until the latch clicked, then stood waiting. Rowan exhaled slowly, setting the papers down on the desk. For the first time since she had met him, he looked not angry, not afraid, but shaken. Whatever he had seen in that envelope, it had changed something instantly. But Lena didn't know what, at least. Not yet. The studio felt different after the man left. Even though filming preparations continued, There was a quiet tension in the air that everyone sensed but no one wanted to talk about. The crew tried to stay focused, but eyes kept drifting toward the hallway leading to the director's office, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Something to explain the strange interruption. Lena walked back into the main hall, trying to settle her thoughts. She had never seen Rowan look so shaken before. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, like something inside him had shifted in an instant. She couldn't stop wondering about the papers inside that envelope. Whatever it wasn't something small. She checked her clipboard again, even though she already knew everything on it. Routine calmed her, but today it wasn't working as well as usual. The sound technician, a quiet man named Hale, approached her with a small microphone in hand. "Are we still doing the sound check early?" he asked. "Yes," Lena said, snapping back into her tasks. The director asked for it. "Let's go ahead." Hale nodded and walked away. Tapping the microphone lightly to test its signal, she tried to push the morning's strange moment out of her mind. There was work to be done. A large production didn't stop moving just because something unexpected happened. But even as she worked, she kept glancing toward the office door. A few minutes later, the door opened. Rowan stepped out. Lena didn't know what she expected maybe for him, to look upset or confused, but he didn't. Instead, he looked composed again, though different from his usual calm. His expression was tighter, serious in a way that made her feel uneasy. He walked directly toward her. "Lena," he said quietly, "can you come to my office for a moment?" Her heart skipped. "Yes, of course." She followed him down the hallway. He didn't speak until they reached the office and closed the door behind them. On the desk lay the papers and photos he had received earlier. He didn't touch them this time. Instead, he looked at her. "I need your help with something," he said. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "I need you to keep what happened earlier private, at least for now." She nodded immediately. "I understand. I'm not hiding anything from the crew," he continued. "But until I understand the full situation, I don't want unnecessary worry. I'll inform everyone soon, once I've spoken to the person outside again." "You're going to talk to him?" Lena asked. "I have to," Rowan said. "There's no choice. The information he brought, it changes things." She waited, curious but respectful. He didn't offer details, which told her the matter was heavier than she imagined. "You can return to the hall," he said after a moment. "I'll rejoin the team shortly." Lena nodded and left the office, closing the door softly behind her as she returned to the hall. She found herself thinking about the man outside. Who was he? Why had he come here? And how could a few papers change the director's expression so drastically? The questions followed her like shadows. A while later, Rowan emerged again. This time, he didn't walk to the crew. Instead, he went straight to the main exit. Lena watched him go. He stepped outside. She followed at a slow pace until she could see him through the glass doors. The man who had delivered the envelope was standing near a bench, his hands in his pockets. Waiting exactly where he said he would, Rowan approached him calmly. But Lena could see tension in his shoulders. Even from a distance, she didn't get close enough to hear their conversation. She would never intrude, but she could see the way they stood, the way they spoke. The man talked first, explaining something while keeping his gaze steady. Rowan listened, occasionally asking questions, his expression serious and focused. At one point, Rowan looked down at the envelope he was holding, and his face tightened slightly. The man responded with a slow nod. As if confirming something difficult, the conversation lasted almost 15 minutes. When Rowan finally came back inside, Lena stepped away from the door. Pretending she had been adjusting a piece of equipment, he gave her a brief look as he walked. Past a look that told her he was still processing everything. He returned to the hall. Gathering the crew around him, Lena joined the circle. Standing near the back, "Everyone," the director began, his tone steady but heavier than usual. "I need your attention for a moment." The hall fell silent. "We may need to adjust our filming plans for today," he continued. "There is new information regarding the project that I need to review. I'll do my best to make sure it doesn't cause delays, but I want us to be prepared." The crew exchanged looks, curious but respectful. No one pressed him for details. For now, Rowan said, continue with setup as normal. I'll be in my office for the next few minutes. After that, I'll speak with the production team about our next steps. He turned and walked away. Lena watched him disappear down the hallway again. She had never seen him pause filming before. Not like this. Something serious was happening. She tried to continue her work, but her thoughts were restless. It wasn't just curiosity. It was concern. Rowan wasn't the type of person who panicked easily. Whatever was in that envelope had to be important. A few minutes later, one of the camera operators, a sharp but friendly man named Noel, approached her. "What's going on with the boss?" he whispered. Lena shook her head lightly. He didn't say much. Just that there's something he needs to review. "You saw that guy who came earlier, right?" "That was strange," she admitted. "But I don't think it's something bad for us. Probably something to do with the documentary." Still, Noel said, scratching his jaw. The director looked like he'd seen a ghost when he opened that envelope. Lena didn't want to admit it, but Noel wasn't wrong. "We'll find out eventually," she said softly. "Let's just do what he asked." Noel nodded and went back to adjusting the camera. For the next hour, the crew worked around the quiet weight hanging in the air. People spoke less, and when they did, their voices were softer than usual. It wasn't fear, it was uncertainty. Lena kept glancing toward Rowan's office, watching for any sign that he was ready to return. Finally, the door opened again. Rowan stepped out and walked back into the hall, his expression stable but serious. He signaled Lena. "Can you come with me for a moment?" he asked. She followed him to a smaller meeting room. This time the door remained slightly open. He laid the papers from the envelope on the table. "These documents," he said slowly, "are related to the main subject of our documentary. They contain information that contradicts what we were told during our earlier interviews." Lena felt a small shiver of shock. Contradicting information was normal in documentaries. But the way he said it felt heavier. "What does that mean for the project?" she asked. "We can't continue filming the way we planned," he answered. "Not without understanding the truth. If we move forward based on false information, the entire documentary loses its integrity." She nodded, appreciating his honesty. "But the guest is arriving soon," she reminded gently. "I know," Rowan said. "I'll speak with them. We may need to ask different questions, or even postpone the shoot." He ran a hand across the table, thinking deeply. "What did the man outside say?" Lena asked before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Rowan answered. "He said he worked with one of the people we interviewed earlier. He claimed some details we recorded were not only wrong, but intentionally changed." Lena felt her breath catch. "Intentionally?" "Yes, and if that's true, continuing without verifying the facts would be irresponsible." Lena didn't know what to say. She understood now why his expression had changed so suddenly. She also understood why he looked so troubled. "What will you do?" she asked softly. "First," he said, "I need to confirm whether these documents are real. Then I'll talk to our producers. If the information is accurate, we might have to change the entire direction of the documentary." Lena's eyes widened. She knew how much work that meant, how much time, effort, and planning would need to be redone. But she also knew Rowan. He wasn't someone who would ignore the truth just because. It made things harder. "I'll help however I can," she said quietly. He gave her a small, grateful nod. "Thank you. For now, let's return to the crew and keep everything running smoothly until we decide our next step together." They walked back into the main hall. The rest of the crew looked up, waiting for direction. Rowan didn't make any grand announcement, but he gave clear instructions. "We will continue preparing for the interview," he said, "but be ready for changes. I'll inform everyone once I speak with the producers." People nodded, trusting him. Lena returned to her tasks, feeling both worried and strangely hopeful. Something important was unfolding, something that might change the entire project, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The day wasn't even halfway through, yet everything already felt different. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The hallway outside the meeting room, stayed unusually quiet long after Rowan and Lena returned to the main floor. People sensed the shift even if they didn't understand it. The studio still buzzed with activity lights humming, cables dragging across the floor, cameras being adjusted, but there was something underneath the noise. Something like the faint tension before a storm. Lena kept herself busy, helping with small adjustments and checking details as the minutes passed. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her mind kept drifting back to the envelope. She couldn't shake the image of the director's face tightening the moment he glanced at those pages. If something could shake a man as steady as Rowan, it had to be serious. The guest for the interview was expected to arrive in less than 30 minutes. Normally, this would be the busiest part of her morning, double-checking the seat positions, the lighting, the sound levels. But today, everything felt off balance. She kept stealing glances toward the hallway, waiting for Rowan to reappear with new instructions. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, she saw him walking out of his office again. His pace was steady, but his eyes were thoughtful. The kind of expression someone wears when they're replaying a dozen ideas inside their head. He approached her quietly. Lena said, "Can you step outside with me for a moment?" She nodded and followed him toward the exit. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint scent of morning traffic and a hint of dampness from the previous night's rain. The man who delivered the envelope was gone. Rowan stood near the railing, at the edge of the lot, and looked out for a long moment before speaking. "I talked to him again," he finally said. "He gave more details. It's enough for me to believe that what he brought us might be genuine." Lena swallowed. "What? And that means the documentary could be based on wrong information?" "It means," Rowan said carefully, "that someone we interviewed earlier may not have been honest with us. And if that's true, it changes everything." Quiet pause stretched between them. "Are you going to tell the producers now?" she asked. "Yes," he said with a slow exhale. "But before that, I need to confirm something else. It's something small, but important. I need a second pair of eyes." Lena's heart raced slightly. "What do you need me to do?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out one of the photographs from the envelope. She looked carefully. It was a picture of a man they had interviewed. A few weeks ago, the one who claimed to have witnessed events central to their documentary story. The photo wasn't dramatic or unusual. It showed him standing outside a building, talking to someone. But on the back, written in clear letters, were dates and locations that didn't match the timeline of the man's interview. "These dates," Rowan said, "are different from what he told us. If these are correct, it means he wasn't where he claimed to be." Lena studied the writing again. It was clean, confident, as though written by someone who knew the truth and had no reason to hide it. "What do you want me to check?" she asked. "Do you remember the day we interviewed him? I want you to check his original statement. Compare the details." She nodded firmly. "I can do that." "Good," Rowan said. "Let's go inside. The files should be on the shared system." They walked back toward the building, the quiet tension following them like a shadow. Inside, the crew looked up briefly as the two re-entered the hall, but no one spoke. They simply returned to their tasks, trusting Rowan would update them when needed. He led Lena to one of the editing rooms, where a long desk held multiple screens and folders. The hum of machinery filled the tight space. Rowan pulled up the digital interview files. "Here it is," he said, opening the transcript. Lena leaned closer, reading the man's statement. He had claimed to be in a certain city during a crucial event when he described in detail. According to him, he had seen something important there. But the writing on the back of the photograph said he had been somewhere else entirely. She pointed at the contradiction. "These don't match at all." "No," Rowan said quietly. "They don't. Do you think he lied?" "I think," Rowan said slowly, "that we don't know the whole truth yet, but we have to find out." He tapped his fingers lightly on the desk, a rare sign of nervous energy. After a moment, he straightened. "I need to call the producers now. Would you stay here? If they ask for details, I want you to explain exactly what you saw." "Of course," she said. He stepped into the hallway and made the call. Lena couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could see the way he paced slowly, one hand in his pocket, the other holding the phone. She could feel the weight of the moment even from across the room. When he finally returned, he looked tired but focused. "They're coming in," he said. "They want to see everything themselves." Lena felt her stomach flip. Producers weren't unkind, but they were very serious about their work. If they were coming in person, it meant they understood the severity of the situation. "They'll be here in about 20 minutes, Rowan continued. "In the meantime, can you print everything from the envelope? Want them to see the physical copies too?" Of course. She hurried to the printing room. The machine hummed as it produced the pages, photographs, documents, notes. She stacked them neatly, feeling the tension rise inside her with each printed sheet. When she returned to the editing room, Rowan was reviewing footage from the interview. He paused the video when she entered. "Here," he said, pointing at the paused frame. "This is the moment he describes in detail later. Look at the background." She studied the screen. The background didn't match what he claimed in the transcript. The weather, the buildings, and small details that were easy to miss unless you were looking for them. "You're right," she whispered. "It doesn't fit," Rowan nodded. "The man outside said we would find more mistakes if we looked closely." I didn't want to believe him, but he gestured toward the screen. "It's here." The weight in her chest grew heavier. She wasn't angry, but she felt betrayed on Rowan's behalf. Documentary work depended on truth, trust, honesty. They treated their subjects with respect, and they expected the same in return. Before either of them could say more, the door opened. Two producers walked in, one older, calm, and steady, the other younger, sharp-eyed and precise. They greeted Rowan quickly, then glanced at the papers in Lena's hands. "These are the documents?" the older producer asked. "Yes," Rowan said, "and there's more on the system." Lena handed the printed pages to them. They both took them carefully, reading each sheet with deep concentration. The room felt even smaller as silence filled the space. After several long minutes, the younger producer spoke. "This contradicts our core interview," he said. "If this is true, we need to rethink the entire direction." Rowan nodded. "I agree." The older producer lowered the document slowly. "We can't continue filming as planned today." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Lena watched Rowan. His expression didn't crumble or panic. Instead, he looked deeply resolved, as if he had already prepared himself for this outcome. "We'll need to verify everything," the older producer continued. "We can't rely solely on the word of a stranger. But the evidence here is too detailed to ignore." "I'm already checking the footage for inconsistencies," Rowan said. The younger producer nodded. "Good. We'll suspend filming until we understand what's real and what was fabricated." Lena felt a rush of sympathy for Rowan. He had spent months shaping this documentary. To pause everything now, after so much work, had to be painful. Yet he didn't complain. "Thank you both," he said simply. "I'll inform the crew." The producers nodded and left the room to make some calls. When they were gone, the weight of the moment finally settled fully. Lena looked at him. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. He took a slow breath. "It's not easy, but it's the right thing," she nodded, admiring his steadiness. Rowan stepped out into the hall. The crew looked up instantly, sensing the decision before he even spoke. "We're pausing the shoot," he announced calmly. "There's new information we need to verify before we continue." Soft murmurs filled the room, but no one objected. They trusted him. For now, he continued, "Pack the main equipment carefully. I'll update everyone as soon as we know the next step." The crew moved into action. Lena remained near him, waiting until the noise softened. "What happens now?" she asked. Rowan looked around the hall, watching the careful movements of the team he cared for. "Now," he said softly, "we find the truth. No matter how long it takes." His voice carried a quiet conviction, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be powerful. Lena realized in that moment that she wasn't just witnessing a setback, she was witnessing a turning point, a shift in the story. Something big had begun, something that would change everything in ways none of them could yet see. And the director's expression, that moment it changed, was only the start. The moment the office door closed behind the director, the entire hallway fell into a strange silence. It was the kind of silence that made people hold their breath without even realizing it. No one on the crew knew what the visitor had shown him, but everyone felt the weight of it. Even from where she stood, just a few steps down the hall, the assistant could sense that something inside the director had shifted. There was a tightness in his voice when he told her to give them privacy. Something she had never heard from him before. She lingered near the editing room, pretending to sort equipment labels on a clipboard she wasn't actually reading. Her hands were steady, but her mind kept racing. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but in the quiet building, even soft voices found their way through thin walls. At first, she heard nothing at all, just the faint hum of distant lights. Then the director's voice rose ever so slightly, not angry but strained, almost like a person trying to hold something together that was threatening to fall apart. The visitor's tone was calm, too calm for the heaviness in the air. He wasn't emotional, and that made it worse. He spoke like someone who had carried the same burden for a long time and had finally decided he couldn't hold it alone anymore. Every now and then, there was a pause, the kind that suggested the director was flipping through the documents the visitor had brought. Imagined him sitting at his desk with the envelope open, papers scattered across the surface, the color drained from his face. Time moved slowly. The assistant kept glancing toward the shut door, feeling helpless. She respected his privacy, but she also cared about the project and everyone working on it. Whatever was happening would affect them all. Herself by organizing cables, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the same question. What could possibly shake the director like that? Eventually, the visitor's voice grew clearer. He was explaining something about dates, about statements that didn't match records, about how certain claims in the documentary were not just slightly inaccurate but completely false. The assistant froze when she heard those words. False. Not misunderstood. Not miscommunicated. Not missing context. Completely false. She didn't know all the details, but she understood enough. If a major interview had been built on false information, then every decision based on that interview now stood on unstable ground. It wasn't just a small mistake. It threatened the entire story they were trying to tell. She felt a strange pressure in her chest, part worry, part disbelief. The director's voice came through again, quieter than before. He wasn't denying anything. He was asking questions. Hard, heavy questions. He wanted to know how the visitor had found out, why they hadn't come sooner, and whether anyone else knew. There was a tremble in his voice that she had never heard in all the months she had worked with him. He was usually composed, patient, and focused, even in stressful moments. But this time, he sounded like someone who had just realized the floor beneath him wasn't solid. There was a long stretch of silence after that. She wasn't sure if they had stopped talking or if they were speaking too softly to hear. What she did know was that the entire building felt heavier. The crew members who were still around moved more quietly than usual, exchanging uncertain glances but not daring to speak. No one wanted to step out of line in a moment like this. They all sensed that something important was unfolding behind that closed door. When the director finally emerged, the assistant was standing a few feet away. She didn't rush to speak. She didn't even move. She simply watched as he stepped out of the office with the envelope in one hand and the door closing slowly behind him. His face looked different, not panicked but deeply troubled. His eyes carried a kind of tiredness that made her heart tighten. He stopped walking when he noticed her. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and she could see that he wasn't just processing information. He was wrestling with the responsibility that came with it. The project wasn't just a job to him, it was something he believed in. And now that belief had been shaken. The visitor remained inside the office for a few seconds more before stepping out as well. He looked at the director with quiet sympathy, like someone who understood the impact of what he had shared. Then, without saying much, he nodded and walked out of the building. The assistant watched him leave, her thoughts scattered. Part of her wanted to stop him and ask for clarity, but she knew it wasn't her place. The director rubbed a hand over his forehead, as if trying to push away the weight resting there. Then he turned to her and spoke softly. He told her to gather the core crew members in the conference room. His tone wasn't sharp or rushed. It was steady, but there was a heaviness beneath it that she couldn't ignore. He wasn't just giving instructions. He was preparing himself to face the people who trusted him. As she walked down the halls to notify everyone, she felt the tension inside her grow. She wasn't scared, but she was anxious. She knew that whatever the director planned to say would change things. The team had worked long hours and poured their energy into the project. The idea of everything suddenly shifting felt unreal. When she reached the others, she tried to explain calmly that they were needed in the conference room right away. Some of them immediately sensed the seriousness in her voice. They didn't ask many questions, and if they whispered guesses to each other, she didn't hear them. They simply followed her, each step echoing softly along the corridor. The director was already waiting when they arrived. He was sitting at the far end of the table with the documents placed neatly in front of him. He didn't look up right away. Instead, he took a slow breath, as if he needed that moment to gather his strength. The assistant sat quietly near the corner of the table, her hands resting in her lap. When he finally began to speak, his voice was calm, but there was a weight behind every word. He explained that new information had come in regarding one of the most important interviews in their documentary. He didn't go into every detail, but he was honest about the fact that something was very wrong. The interview was not reliable. The details they had trusted, the story they had built around it, all of it needed to be re-examined. The room fell silent. No one rushed to react. No one argued or groaned or blamed anyone. They just sat there, letting the truth settle inside them like a slow-moving shadow. The director told them that he needed time to verify everything before deciding how to move forward. He didn't want guesses or assumptions. He wanted clarity, accuracy, integrity. He reminded them that the purpose of their documentary wasn't just to tell a story, it was to tell the truth. The assistant felt a swell of respect for him in that moment. Even though she knew he was struggling with the weight of the revelation, he was still thinking about doing the right thing. He didn't try to hide anything from the team. He didn't pretend nothing was wrong. He chose honesty, even when it made things harder. After the meeting ended, people left the room slowly, whispering to each other in low tones. Some looked worried, others looked thoughtful, but no one seemed angry. They all trusted the director's judgment, and they knew he wouldn't lead them astray. As the assistant gathered the last of the papers left behind, the director remained seated at the table. He didn't look up when she approached, but he didn't seem bothered by her presence either. He looked like someone deep in thought trying to find the right path in a suddenly complicated situation. She didn't know what the next day would bring or how the documentary would change from here. But she knew one thing for sure. Whatever decision the director made, it would come from a place of integrity. And even though everything felt uncertain, now she trusted that he would find a way to guide the team through it. As she walked out of the conference room, she felt a quiet determination inside her. The project wasn't falling apart. It was shifting, reshaping, and maybe even becoming something deeper than before. She was ready to face whatever came next. The next morning began with a kind of quiet that felt heavier than usual. It wasn't the calm quiet that came before the crew started working. It was the kind of quiet that followed a long night of thinking, worrying, and trying to make sense of things. The assistant arrived early, partly out of habit, and partly because she couldn't sit at home wondering what the director would decide. She entered the studio and found him already there, sitting alone in the conference room, with the same envelope from the previous day resting on the table. He looked tired, but not in a defeated way, more like someone who had spent the night turning a decision over and over, examining it from every angle before choosing the path he knew he had to take. When he noticed her standing in the doorway, he gave a small nod. Not a smile, not a gesture of relief, just a simple acknowledgement that he saw her, that he appreciated she was there. She stepped inside quietly and asked if he needed anything. For a long moment, he didn't answer. He tapped a finger on the edge of the envelope, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he thanked her for coming early and told her that he had reached a decision. His voice was steady, more steady than she expected. And that alone made her feel a little more at ease. He said he would call a full team meeting within the hour. Everyone needed to be present: producers, editors, camera crew, researchers, even interns. What he had to say would affect every part of the project. The assistant nodded and left to begin notifying everyone. But a part of her stayed with that moment, the quiet certainty in his voice. It made her believe that whatever he had decided, it wasn't something he had come too lightly. She spent the next half hour walking through the building, knocking on office doors and popping her head into workrooms. People looked up from there. Screens or paperwork with expressions that ranged from curious to worried. She didn't give them details, only told them that the director had asked everyone to gather in the main room. They understood immediately that it wasn't something small. By the time the last few crew members arrived, the director was already standing at the front of the room. He looked around at the faces that had gathered, faces that had trusted him, worked under him, relied on his judgment. The assistant stood near the side wall, her hands folded lightly in front of her, observing the way he prepared himself to speak. When the room settled into silence, he began. His voice wasn't loud or forceful, but clear and steady. He told them that after reviewing the documents thoroughly, after checking dates, statements, and sources, he had confirmed the truth. The interview they had built the documentary around was not only flawed, it was misleading. Important parts of the story were untrue, and if they released the project as it was, they would be contributing to false information. A ripple of shock moved across the room, but everyone listened without interrupting. The director continued, explaining that he had thought about every possible way to salvage the current structure, editing around the lies, removing sections, reshaping the narrative, but none of those options felt honest. None of them felt right. So he told them his decision. The documentary would not continue as planned. They would not release footage based on misinformation. Instead, they would rebuild the story from the beginning, documenting the truth about what had happened, including how easily a trusted source could distort the narrative. There was a long pause after he finished speaking. It wasn't the uncomfortable kind of pause. It was the thoughtful kind, the moment where everyone absorbed what his decision meant for them, for their work, for the months they had already committed to the project. Some looked down at the floor. Others exchanged quiet glances. A few folded their arms, thinking deeply. Then something unexpected happened. A producer raised her hand and said she respected the decision. An editor nodded in agreement. A camera operator stepped forward and said he would start gathering new equipment logs. One by one, people voiced their support, not loudly, not dramatically, but in simple, steady ways. It was as if the honesty in the director's choice had given them permission to let go of disappointment and embrace the path forward. The assistant felt a warm sense of relief wash over her. She hadn't realized how tense her shoulders were until they relaxed all at once. She watched as the crew began asking questions, not questions filled with panic or frustration, but questions about logistics, planning, and how they could help rebuild. It was clear that the team wasn't falling apart. If anything, they were coming together more strongly. After the meeting ended, groups of people formed naturally around the room. Some discussed ideas for a new angle for the documentary. Others talked about which interviews would need follow-up, which sources needed to be rechecked, and how to approach the new storyline. There was movement, energy, even a touch of excitement. The assistant hadn't expected that, but seeing it made her heart fill with quiet pride. She approached the director once most people had dispersed. He was gathering the papers on the table, stacking them neatly into a pile. When she reached him, she stopped for a moment, not wanting to interrupt his thoughts. He noticed her and gave a tired but genuine smile, small but real. She told him she thought he made the right choice. Not because it was the easiest one, but because it was the honest one. He didn't respond right away, but the look in his eyes said enough. He appreciated her words. He appreciated her presence. The rest of the day moved differently than usual. Instead of following the original shooting schedule, the crew focused on rebuilding. Some people made calls to verify information. Others went through footage to identify what could still be used. New research tasks were assigned. The assistant worked closely with the director, helping organize documents and reaching out to sources. Though the day was long, it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt purposeful, like everyone was working towards something meaningful, rather than just fixing mistakes. Even the director, who had carried the burden of the discovery so heavily the previous day, began to move with more ease. He didn't rush, but he was focused. His determination seemed to lift everyone around him by evening. The studio was still buzzing with activity, but there was a positive energy in the air. People talked more openly, shared ideas more freely, and even laughed a little between tasks. The assistant felt grateful to be part of it all. She had always admired the director's focus, But now she admired him for something deeper, his integrity. As she packed up her things, she saw him standing near the doorway, looking out at the team with a thoughtful expression. She paused, watching him silently for a moment. A day earlier, his face had carried shock and uncertainty. Now, it held something else: resolve. Strong, steady resolve. Before she left, she approached him and asked if he needed help with anything else. He shook his head gently and told her she had done more than enough for the day. She nodded and turned to leave, but he called her name softly. When she looked back, he said he was grateful not just for her work, but for her support during a moment that could have easily broken someone less grounded. His words were simple, but they meant more to her than he probably realized. She walked out of the studio with a sense of closure. Not the kind that comes at the end of a project, but the kind that comes at the end of a difficult chapter, right before a stronger one begins. The night air felt cool and calming as she stepped outside. She glanced up at the sky, feeling lighter than she had in days. The documentary would go on, but in a different direction, one that was honest, responsible, and real. The director had faced a moment of truth, and instead of choosing convenience, he had chosen integrity. And the entire team had followed his lead as she headed home. She realized the story they were now going to tell might be even more powerful than the one they had planned. It wasn't just about the subject of the documentary anymore. It was about truth, about resilience, about admitting mistakes and starting over, about leadership built on honesty rather than pride. And she felt proud to be part of it. The moment the director's expression changed had marked the beginning of a challenge, but it had also become the turning point that made everything stronger. And in the quiet of the evening, she felt grateful to witness that transformation firsthand.